everyone, it's Lindsay. A few weeks ago, I did a video on heat embossing. Today I wanted to show you how you could combine that technique along with some distress inking and do some Emboss Resist to create a really beautiful background. So I'm using the brand new stamp set. This is from Inspired by Stamping, and it is called Snowflake Wonder. I have all of the snowflakes that are in the set loaded onto acrylic blocks, and I'm going to be using Versamark ink to stamp all of them in. Now the first thing I want to do is prep my watercolor cardstock that is 4 inches by 4 inches, and I am using my embossing bag to prep that. Now if you don't have an embossing bag, you can try to use some cornstarch or baby powder also if you don't mind the smell. Now I am just inking up my stamps, and I am going to randomly stamp these out to create a background. Now you won't be able to see this because it is Versamark ink on white paper, so it is clear, you can't see it, but in real life you can see where these are stamping, and it has a little bit of a shiny effect. So if you're actually doing this yourself and you're stamping, you can see where you're stamping at. It's not like the video where it's completely clear and you have no idea where you've stamped the last one. You'll be able to see it, and you'll be able to tell where you need to come back in and fill in some spaces. So I started off with my larger stamps here, and I am just going to randomly stamp these around. Now once I've gone through all of my larger stamps, I try not to stamp two of the same kind next to each other. It's going to happen, but I try not to do it. But once I get through my larger stamps, then I come in with those smaller snowflakes, and I'm going to fill in all of the white area that's in between these larger snowflakes, and that will just help fill up the cardstock and make it appear more random as well. This also will help if you had to stamp any of the same snowflake right next to each other. This will help break those up, and so it's not looking so much like a pattern. You want it to look very random. Now Versamark ink takes a long time to dry, so I was able to completely stamp my background, and then I'm going to sprinkle on white embossing powder. Now because I'm using white cardstock, you can also use clear in place of white. I just like to use my white embossing powder because it stays nice and bright white. Now here you can see with that embossing powder on, you can see the snowflake pattern and the background that I've created with those stamps. You can see I have some that are hanging off the edge, but I also have some that are on the cardstock directly, and they're whole images. You really want both. You want some hanging off, you want some that are whole on the cardstock itself. Now I went ahead and I heat set this off camera. The one thing you want to remember is just make sure you let your heat gun heat up for about 30 seconds before you bring it to your paper, and that will cut down on warping. And also on larger areas like this, you can really burn your embossing powder quite easily just by not paying attention to what you're doing. I've done it so many times before. So just make sure that you're paying attention. If you feel like you've left it on too long, go ahead and pull it away for a little bit and come back in and let that paper cool down and then reheat it. And that will keep you from burning that embossing powder. Now I'm using two different colors of distress ink today. I'm using Evergreen Bough and Picked Raspberry. I chose these colors because they're going to blend beautifully together in the center of this panel. They're going to create an almost purple color. You don't want to create a muddy brown or a black or anything like that. So whenever you're choosing your colors, just make sure you choose something that's going to blend nicely together. You also don't have to use two different colors. You could just stick with one, and that's perfectly fine too. I decided to use two on this panel just because I thought it was pretty. I'm working on watercolor paper today. Now distress inks just blend a little bit more easily, and you can also build up the color a little bit more on your watercolor paper. Now I will also be doing just a little bit of lifting also, and that's why I chose to use watercolor paper. You can use regular cardstock paper, and that will work just as well, except for the lifting. If you want some nice white spots, you want to make sure you use your watercolor paper. Now I am just switching back and forth between these two colors. I started with a very light hand, and now I'm really picking up that color and really building it up. Now when I get to the center, it's going to combine those two colors, and it's creating that purple color. Now you can see as I start to build this color up that those white snowflakes are really starting to pop through. Anywhere that those snowflakes are that are heat embossed, that embossing resists this ink and it stays nice and white underneath. So it really creates this beautiful snowflake pattern, and those snowflakes stay so pretty and crisp and white. Now if it gets just a little bit too colorful, if the ink starts to build up on top of the embossing powder, just take a baby wipe and very gently tap it on there and pull up that ink that's on top of the snowflakes. Now for a little sparkle, I mixed some perfect pearls with water and I did a little splattering effect. Now I did lift a little bit of this up. I kept most of it on there though because it creates a beautiful shine, which you'll be able to see right here. It's not even as pretty in the video as it is in real life. Again, the video just won't capture as shiny as it really is. So the sentiment in this set I thought was perfect for selective stamping. Now I'm going to do a two-tone sentiment here. So I first went ahead and used some painter's tape to mask off the word Christmas. I inked up while I had that mask on the rest of the stamp with black dye ink. Now if any ink gets on any part of the sentiment that you don't want that color, just use a baby wipe and very carefully clean it up. Now I'm using my Misties to make this a little easier. You can use a Stamp-A-Majig. You can also eyeball it if you feel comfortable doing that. And a little trick here, my Misty magnets hold this down, but because it's a die cut, it tends to want to lift up from underneath those magnets. I slit my bone folder right between the lid and the actual Misty, and I use that to hold down that die cut so it's not going to shift at all then. Sometimes when I'm doing this and my really good clear stamps, they're sticky just by nature they will lift that paper up, and the Misty magnets don't always keep it in place. So that's my little trick to get it to stay put. Now I wanted the Christmas word to be a hot pink color, so I am inking it up with some Memento Rosebud ink, and I had already masked off the parts of the sentiment that I had stamped in black. I inked up that Christmas sentiment, peeled off the painter's tape, and then I will stamp this down. If you don't have painter's tape, you could also use Post-it notes. Also, regular Scotch tape will work to mask this off, as well as just using an ink pad here like I'm going to do right now. The top of my sentiment didn't stamp completely. I am getting at eye level with my stamp, looking straight through at it and really using just the very teeny tiny corner of my stamp pad, ink pad, to ink up that stamp where I need it. That will allow you to get right in the nooks and crannies, and if you're careful, it will work this way and you don't need to do any masking. Now I can just flip over my lid and stamp this down, and I'm going to use my bone folder to hold that in place so it doesn't shift in case I need to restamp again. Now to go ahead and put on this frame, I'm using glossy accents, and I just cut that frame with 2 different size circle dies in my Big Shot. Now I am using some white fun foam and double-sided adhesive to put this on the center of that 4" by 4" snowflake panel. And you could see I messed up my sentiment the first time I stamped. I just flipped that circle die cut over and used the other side, and really just doing that saves me a ton of cardstock, just flipping it over and using the other side. Now I am just applying some fun foam to that square panel, and I am going to mount this on a 4 1/4 by 4 1/4 inch top folding white card base that I made. And that will finish off the card for today. I hope you all enjoyed this technique, and I hope you too will give it a try. As always, I will leave you with just a few pictures of the finished card. For more information and the supply list, you can head to my blog, Crafting While Caffeinated.